The summer heat beat down on London like a heavy blanket. Tourists from all corners of the world gathered around Buckingham Palace, their phones and cameras ready to capture the iconic royal guards in their famous red coats and tall bearskin hats. Among those standing at attention was James Wilson, his face a mask of discipline and focus despite the sweat threatening to trickle down his forehead. James had been a royal guard for 7 years now. At 32, the British Jamaican soldier had worked his way up through the ranks with a quiet determination that impressed his superiors. His grandfather had moved to England in the 1960s, and James had grown up listening to stories about serving with honor and representing your country with pride. Those stories had led him here to one of the most prestigious postings a soldier could have. "Look at him. He doesn't even blink," a young boy told his mother, pointing at James with wide-eyed wonder. The mother smiled politely and gently lowered her son's arm. "It's not polite to point, love. Those guards have a very important job." James kept his gaze fixed forward, though he could see everything happening around him in his peripheral vision. This was one of the busier days, with the changing of the guard ceremony scheduled for later that morning. The forecourt was already filling up with visitors eager to get the best spots for viewing the elaborate ritual. Off to his right, a group of American college students were taking selfies, trying to get James in the background of their shots. To his left, an elderly couple read from a guidebook, occasionally glancing up at the palace and at him with appreciation for the tradition they were witnessing. James had learned to tune out most of the chatter, while remaining alert to any potential security concerns. It was a skill that took time to develop. Among the growing crowd, a man in his 40s pushed his way forward. He wore a rumpled designer shirt, expensive sunglasses, and an expression of entitlement that James had seen many times before. Some tourists seemed to think the guards were simply decorations rather than active duty soldiers with real responsibilities. "Can't believe they let you lot guard the Queen," the man muttered, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. A few people turned with uncomfortable expressions, but most pretended not to notice, not wanting to get involved. The comment registered with James, but his training held firm. Royal guards were used to all kinds of comments and behaviors from the public. The golden rule was simple: maintain composure and dignity at all times. James had dealt with far worse over the years. The man, who would later be identified as Victor Kensington, a businessman from Sheffield, continued to stare at James with undisguised contempt. The smell of alcohol hung in the air around him, though it wasn't even noon yet. A tour guide leading a group of Japanese visitors noticed the tension and quickly directed her group to the other side of the forecourt. She'd been doing this job long enough to recognize when someone might cause trouble. "This heat is brutal, isn't it?" a woman from Canada remarked to her husband as they stood nearby, fanning herself with a folded map. "I don't know how they stand there for hours in those heavy uniforms." "Military discipline," her husband replied with admiration. "My brother was in the army. Said the hardest thing wasn't the physical training but learning to stand perfectly still for inspection." James had indeed spent countless hours perfecting his stance. Back straight, shoulders squared, chin level, eyes forward. The weight of the bearskin hat, nearly 1.5 feet tall, was something you got used to over time. The heavy red tunic, despite being made of wool, had been designed for all weather conditions. The discomfort faded into the background when you focused on the honor of the position. His thoughts drifted briefly to his family. His mother had cried with pride when he'd first been selected for the Queen's Guard. His father, normally a quiet man, had called everyone they knew to share the news. And his younger sister had immediately asked for photos to show off to her friends. The memory brought a warmth that helped James ignore the actual heat of the day. A child dropped an ice cream cone near James's feet, and the mother quickly pulled the crying boy away, apologizing profusely. James remained motionless, though he wanted to tell the mother it was fine, that accidents happen. That was another part of the job, maintaining the mystique of the unwavering guard, even when your human instinct was to react. Victor, who had moved off to the side briefly, returned with a fresh drink in hand from one of the nearby cafes. He was swaying slightly now, his face flushed from both alcohol and the heat. "Hey you," he called out, pointing at James. "Do you actually do anything or just stand there looking pretty?" A nervous titter ran through part of the crowd. Most people looked embarrassed, a few took steps back, and one brave woman said, "Sir, please show some respect." Victor ignored her, his attention fixed solely on James. "I'm talking to you. Soldier boy. Two police officers who patrolled the area had noticed the commotion and began making their way through the crowd. They dealt with disruptive tourists daily and had developed a sixth sense for when someone might cross the line from annoying to problematic. James continued his stance, not acknowledging the provocation in any way. The ceremonial rifle he carried remained perfectly positioned against his shoulder. His eyes stared straight ahead, though he was acutely aware of Victor's movements. "Been to 3 countries on this trip," Victor announced loudly to no one in particular, "and everywhere we go, they're letting people like him take over important jobs." He gestured sloppily toward James. A few people began to record the scene with their phones, sensing that something newsworthy might happen. Others quietly slipped away, not wanting to be part of whatever was unfolding. The 2 police officers had almost reached Victor when he suddenly stepped closer to the rope barrier that kept tourists at a distance from the guards. "I pay my taxes," Victor declared, his voice rising. "My family's been in this country for generations. What gives you the right to stand there like you own the place?" One of the officers, a woman with short brown hair and a no-nonsense expression, called out, "Sir, I need you to step back and lower your voice." James remained perfectly still, his mind calm despite the growing tension. His training had prepared him for all sorts of situations, from medical emergencies to terrorist threats to drunk and disorderly tourists. While most of his days passed without incident, each guard knew that trouble could arise at any moment. Victor swayed on his feet, looking from the approaching officers back to James. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes, the look of a man about to make a very poor decision. "Sir," the male officer said firmly as they reached him, "you need to move away from the barrier now." "I'm just having a conversation," Victor slurred, not taking his eyes off James. "Don't we have freedom of speech anymore?" "You're disturbing the peace and harassing a member of the Queen's Guard," the female officer explained with practiced patience. "Please come with us now." Several yards away, another Royal Guard was positioned. Corporal Thomas Lee had served with James for 3 years and could sense the situation deteriorating. The guards had subtle signals they could use to communicate with each other when necessary, but for now, both maintained their ceremonial poses. A tour group of schoolchildren arrived at the edge of the forecourt, their teacher quickly assessing the situation and holding them back. "We'll wait a moment before approaching," she told them quietly. "Remember what we discussed about respecting the guards and their important role." The children nodded solemnly, watching with wide eyes as the officers attempted to lead Victor away. James could hear their whispered questions. "What's happening? Why is that man angry? Is the guard okay?" Victor suddenly jerked away from the officer's guiding hand. "Don't touch me. I've done nothing wrong." The crowd tensed collectively. James remained impassive, though his training had him mentally preparing for various scenarios. Most situations were resolved peacefully by the police, but guards were authorized to react if directly threatened. "Look at him standing there like a statue," Victor sneered, his words becoming more slurred. "Too afraid to even look me in the eye." "That's enough," the male officer said more sternly. "You're coming with us now." A young couple who had been watching the scene unfold decided to intervene in their own way. The woman wearing a bright yellow sundress approached the female officer. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "We have video of this man's behavior for the last 10 minutes if that helps." The officer nodded appreciatively. "Thank you. We may need that." Victor's attention was momentarily drawn to this interaction. "What are you filming me for?" "That's an invasion of privacy." James remained focused, his eyes fixed ahead, his posture perfect. In his peripheral vision, he could see his fellow guard, Thomas, equally steady. They had both been through the rigorous selection process and months of intensive training to earn their positions. The Royal Guards weren't just for show. They were elite soldiers with real responsibilities. The sun continued to beat down as the situation reached a tipping point. Victor, growing more agitated by the second, shook off the male officer's attempt to guide him away. "I want to see what he'll do," Victor declared, turning back toward James. "They say these guards can't move no matter what. Is that true?" "Sir, that's a dangerous misconception," the female officer warned. "The Queen's Guards are active duty soldiers authorized to react to threats." But Victor wasn't listening anymore. The alcohol, the heat, and his own prejudices had created a perfect storm of poor judgment. He leaned against the barrier rope, his face contorted with misplaced anger. "Hey!" he shouted directly at James. I'm talking to you. The crowd had grown larger now, drawn by the commotion. Some people were filming, others were hurrying away, and a few were calling for more police assistance. The atmosphere had shifted from touristic curiosity to tense anticipation. James stood firm, his eyes forward, his mind clear. 7 years of service had taught him patience and discipline, beyond what most civilians could understand. Behind his stoic expression, he was aware of every movement around him, every potential threat, every exit route. This was what it meant to be a Royal Guard. Not just a tourist attraction, but a soldier dedicated to protecting one of the nation's most important symbols. And as Victor's anger continued to build, James knew this ordinary summer day was about to become anything but ordinary. The crowd around Buckingham Palace had grown thicker as word spread about the confrontation brewing near the North Gate. Tourists who had come for photos now found themselves witnesses to something far more troubling. Victor stood swaying slightly, his face flushed with anger and alcohol, while James maintained his stoic guard position. "I think we should leave," a woman whispered to her husband, pulling her children closer. "This doesn't feel right." The husband nodded, guiding his family toward the edge of the gathering crowd. Others followed their example, creating small gaps in the sea of onlookers. But many more stayed, phones raised, capturing what was unfolding. "Sir, this is your final warning," the female officer said firmly to Victor. "You need to come with us now or we'll have to place you under arrest." Victor scoffed, his eyes never leaving James. "For what? Speaking my mind?" "Last I checked, this was still a free country." "For disturbing the peace and harassing a member of the military," the male officer explained with dwindling patience. "Now please come with us before this escalates further." A group of teenagers stood nearby, uncomfortably shifting their weight from foot to foot. One of them, a boy of about 16 with glasses and a camera hanging around his neck, leaned toward his friend. "I came to take pictures of the palace, not watch some drunk guy make a fool of himself." His friend nodded. "My dad was in the army. He said the guards here are all highly trained soldiers, not just guys in fancy uniforms." "Exactly," a tour guide who had paused with her group added quietly. "Many have served in Afghanistan, Iraq, or other conflict zones. The ceremonial duty is considered an honor, given to exemplary soldiers." Victor must have overheard this exchange because he turned toward them with a sneer. "You think standing like a statue all day takes skill? Please. They just put him here to look diverse for the tourists." Several people gasped at the blatant racism. The tour guide quickly ushered her group away, throwing an apologetic glance toward James, who remained perfectly still despite the escalating situation. Thomas, the other guard stationed nearby, continued his own unwavering stance, though his eyes flickered briefly toward his colleague. Both men had faced similar situations before: tourists who had too much to drink, people testing their discipline with jokes or insults, even the occasional protester trying to make a political statement. But there was something more volatile about Victor's behavior, a dangerous edge that suggested this might not end with just words. "My grandfather fought for this country in the war," Victor continued, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "And now they've got foreigners guarding the palace? It's a disgrace." "That's enough," the male officer said, stepping forward and taking Victor's arm firmly. "You're under arrest for disturbing the peace and using racially aggravated threatening behavior." Victor jerked his arm away with surprising strength, stumbling backward toward the barrier rope. "Get your hands off me. I know my rights." The female officer spoke quietly into her radio, requesting backup. The situation was escalating beyond what they had initially anticipated. A middle-aged couple who had been watching with growing concern approached one of the nearby palace staff members, a woman in a dark suit with an earpiece. "Shouldn't someone do something?" the woman asked nervously. "That guard is just standing there taking all this abuse." The staff member gave a reassuring smile. "The Royal Guards are extremely well trained for these situations. They won't react unless there's a genuine security threat. The police are handling it." Indeed, James stood firm, his face betraying no emotion, his eyes fixed forward as he had been trained to do. But inside, his mind was alert and ready. Years of military training had taught him to assess threats while maintaining appearance. Victor was drunk and belligerent, but so far he was just another tourist making a scene. Unpleasant, but not dangerous enough to break protocol. The summer heat continued to beat down on the forecourt. A bead of sweat trickled down James's temple, but he didn't move to wipe it away. The weight of the bearskin hat felt heavier than usual in the humidity. but such discomforts were part of the job. Victor had begun pacing now, gesturing wildly as he continued his tirade. Do you know how much money we spend on the royal family? Millions, and for what? So they can hire people like him to stand around looking important. A few American tourists exchanged uncomfortable glances. One of them, an older man with white hair and a kind face, stepped forward. Sir, he said calmly to Victor, I think you've made your point. Why don't we all move along and enjoy the rest of this beautiful day? Victor rounded on him immediately. Mind your own business, Yank. This doesn't concern you. The American held up his hands in surrender and backed away, rejoining his wife, who whispered, At least you tried, David. By now, 2 more police officers were making their way through the crowd, responding to the call for backup. The situation had drawn the attention of the palace security team as well. A plain-clothed officer with an earpiece stood near the entrance, observing the scene carefully. James could see all of this without moving his head. His peripheral vision had been honed through years of standing guard, allowing him to maintain his forward gaze while remaining aware of everything happening around him. He knew additional help was arriving, which was standard procedure for any disturbance near the palace grounds. You think you're so special? Victor sneered, turning his attention back to James. Standing there all high and mighty. Why don't you say something? Too scared to open your mouth? The 2 original police officers had positioned themselves on either side of Victor now, ready to restrain him if necessary. The female officer spoke in a calm, measured tone. Sir, we understand you're upset, but this behavior needs to stop now. The guard is performing his official duties and cannot respond to you. Can't or won't? Victor challenged, his words slurring together. I bet if I was rich or famous, he'd be happy to chat with me. A young woman who had been filming the encounter on her phone whispered to her friend, This is going to go viral. That poor guard shouldn't have to deal with this. Her friend nodded. My brother's in the military. He says the discipline these guys have is incredible. Most people would have snapped by now. Indeed, James's discipline was being tested to its limits, not by the urge to respond to the insults, those rolled off him like water, but by the growing concern that Victor might escalate from words to actions. As a guard, his first duty was to maintain his ceremonial position, but he was also responsible for security, and Victor was becoming increasingly unpredictable. The 2 additional police officers had arrived now, creating a stronger presence around Victor. One of them, a tall man with a reassuring demeanor, addressed the crowd. Folks, we need to clear this area. Please continue with your visit to other parts of the palace grounds. Most people began to disperse, though some lingered at a distance, still watching the drama unfold. The police were now focused on containing Victor and removing him from the situation before things got worse. Sir, the tall officer said to Victor, I need you to come with us now. This is not a request. Victor's face contorted with rage. So that's how it is? He gets to stand there insulting me with his silence, and I'm the one being arrested? No one is insulting you, the female officer explained patiently. The guard is performing his duties as required. Now please come with us willingly, or we will have to use force. For a moment it seemed like Victor might finally comply. His shoulders slumped slightly and he took a step toward the officers. But then his gaze locked onto James again, and something changed in his expression. A hardening, a decision made in alcohol-fueled anger. You think you're better than me? He shouted at James. You're nothing! Nothing. And with that, Victor lunged forward, ducking under the barrier rope before any of the officers could stop him. The crowd gasped collectively as he crossed the line that separated tourists from the officially guarded area. Time seemed to slow down for James. His training kicked in immediately, his mind calculating threat levels and appropriate responses in a fraction of a second. Victor was now in a restricted area, moving aggressively toward a member of the Queen's Guard. This was no longer just a drunk tourist making a scene. This was a security breach. The police officers reacted instantly, moving to intercept Victor, but he was surprisingly quick for someone so intoxicated. He closed the distance to James in seconds, his face twisted with rage, his right hand raised in what appeared to be a preparation to strike. James remained still, but his body tensed imperceptibly, ready to act if necessary. The protocol was clear. Maintain ceremonial position unless a clear and present danger emerged. That line was about to be crossed. What are you going to do now? Victor taunted, now just feet away from James. Still going to stand there like a statue when I'm right in your face? The crowd watched in horror as Victor reached out, his hand moving toward James's uniform. This was the moment when everyone realized just how serious the situation had become. Touching a royal guard was strictly forbidden. Attempting to assault one was unthinkable. Thomas, the other guard, had shifted his gaze now, protocol temporarily set aside as the security threat became immediate. The police officers were rushing forward, but they wouldn't reach Victor in time to prevent whatever he planned to do next. James stood at the crossroads of duty and danger, his years of training about to be put to the ultimate test. The summer air hung heavy with tension as Victor's hand reached toward him, crossing the final boundary between inappropriate behavior and physical assault. And in that moment, as hundreds of witnesses held their breath, the true nature of what it meant to be a royal guard, not just a tourist, attraction but a highly trained soldier with real responsibilities, was about to be demonstrated in a way that Victor would never forget. Victor's hand made contact with James's chest, shoving him with surprising force. The crowd gasped collectively, phones raised to capture the unthinkable moment when someone dared to physically assault a royal guard. For a split second, the world seemed to pause, tourists frozen in shock, police officers lunging forward but still too far away, and James himself, faced with a situation that had crossed the line from harassment to actual physical threat. What happened next stunned everyone watching. In one fluid motion that spoke of years of military training, James pivoted slightly and stepped to the side. His ceremonial stillness vanished, replaced by the precise movements of a highly trained soldier responding to a threat. His rifle, which had been held at the shoulder position, was shifted securely to his left side as his right arm came up in a defensive block, deflecting Victor's second attempted shove. "Stand down," James commanded in a voice that carried across the forecourt. The first words the crowd had heard him speak. His tone was firm but controlled, carrying the authority of someone who had served in actual combat zones, not just ceremonial duties. Victor, momentarily startled by the guard's sudden animation, stumbled backward. "So you can move after all," he slurred, regaining his balance and lunging forward again with his fist raised. By now, the police officers were only steps away, but not close enough to prevent what was happening. James sidestepped Victor's wild punch with the economy of movement that came from extensive close-quarters combat training. In the same motion, his free hand grasped Victor's wrist, using the man's own momentum to guide him off balance. "On the ground, now," James ordered, his voice remaining steady despite the adrenaline rushing through his system. This was no longer about maintaining the iconic image of the stoic guard. This was about containing a security threat, using the minimum force necessary. Victor fought against James's grip, his face contorted with rage and humiliation. "Get your hands off me," he shouted, trying to twist away. The crowd watched in amazement as James executed a textbook restraint maneuver, bringing Victor to his knees without injuring him. Years of training had prepared him for this exact scenario, how to neutralize a threat while causing minimal harm. "He's so controlled," someone in the crowd whispered. "He could have really hurt that guy if he wanted to." Indeed, James was demonstrating the perfect balance between force and restraint. Despite Victor's aggressive attack and the racist comments he had endured, James was responding with professional discipline, not anger. The police officers reached them now, quickly taking over the restraint of Victor, who continued to struggle and shout obscenities. As soon as the officers had control, James stepped back, resuming his formal posture, though he remained alert to the possibility of further threats. Thomas, the other guard, had also broken his stance and moved slightly closer, ready to assist if needed. The two soldiers exchanged a brief glance, a moment of silent communication between comrades who understood the weight of their responsibilities. "You just assaulted a member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces while on duty," the female officer informed Victor as her colleagues handcuffed him. "That's a serious offense with severe penalties." Victor, finally seeming to realize the gravity of what he had done, stopped struggling. His face, previously flushed with anger, now paled slightly. "He put his hands on me first," he protested weakly. "We have about 200 witnesses and probably 50 videos that say otherwise," the male officer replied, nodding toward the crowd of tourists, many of whom were indeed recording everything on their phones. A palace staff member had approached James, speaking quietly into her radio while asking him if he was all right. James gave a small nod, his expression once again professional and composed. "Should I call for a replacement?" the staff member asked. James shook his head slightly. "No need. I can complete my shift." This quiet exchange was overheard by some of the closer bystanders, who looked at James with newfound respect. Not only had he handled the attack with impressive skill, but he was willing to continue his duties as if nothing had happened. As the police began to lead Victor away, a senior officer who had just arrived on the scene approached James. "We'll need your statement later, but for now, are you sure you're okay to continue?" "Yes, sir," James replied simply. The officer nodded with approval. "Well handled, soldier." Meanwhile, Victor was being escorted toward a police van parked nearby. The reality of his situation seemed to be dawning on him as the alcohol's effects began to fade, replaced by the cold realization of the consequences he would face. "Wait," he said, suddenly looking panicked. "I didn't mean to, I was just—" "Save it for the station," one of the officers told him firmly as they guided him into the van. The crowd, which had been hushed during the confrontation, now buzzed with excited conversations. Tourists who had come expecting to see nothing more than the changing of the guard had witnessed something far more dramatic, a real demonstration of why these weren't just ceremonial figures, but actual soldiers. "Did you see how fast he moved?" a young man asked his companion. "One second he was standing still, the next he had that guy on the ground. And he didn't even hurt him," his friend replied. "He could have, but he just controlled him until the police got there." An elderly gentleman with a military bearing approached one of the palace staff members. "I served in the Royal Marines years ago," he said. "That young man there," he nodded toward James, "handled himself exactly as he should have. Please make sure his superiors hear that from a veteran." The staff member smiled. "I'm sure they'll review the incident, sir, but I'll pass along your comments." Nearby, a family from Canada was discussing what they had witnessed. "I always thought they were just for show," the father admitted, "standing there in those fancy uniforms. I never realized they were actual soldiers who could handle themselves like that." The way he moved, his teenage son added with admiration. "That was like something from a movie, except it was real." His mother nodded. "And notice how quickly he went back to his position afterward. That's discipline." Indeed, James had resumed his guard stance, eyes forward, posture perfect, as if the dramatic interruption had never occurred. Only those who looked closely might notice a slightly heightened alertness in his demeanor, a readiness that hadn't been there before. Thomas had also returned to his formal position, though he had moved slightly closer to James's post than he had been before, a subtle adjustment that would be noted and approved by their superiors later. Palace security staff had begun to disperse the crowd, politely asking people to move along. Additional police officers arrived to take statements from witnesses, particularly those who had video recordings of the incident. "Can I speak to him?" asked a young boy, pointing at James. "I want to tell him he was awesome." His mother smiled but shook her head. "No, honey. He's back on duty now and we need to respect that. Maybe we can write a letter to the palace later to say thank you." A tour guide who had witnessed everything was already incorporating the event into her explanation to a new group that had just arrived. "The royal guards you see are not just ceremonial figures," she explained. "They are fully trained soldiers, many with combat experience. While they maintain their iconic stillness as part of tradition, they are always ready to respond to threats, as we just witnessed." Her group looked at James with heightened interest, seeing beyond the distinctive uniform to the professional soldier beneath. The American tourists, who had tried to intervene earlier, were discussing the incident. As they walked away, "That could have gone so much worse," the white-haired man named David said to his wife, "if the guard had responded with anger instead of training." "But he didn't," his wife pointed out. "That's what professionals do. They don't let emotions dictate their actions." Meanwhile, inside the police van, Victor sat with his head in his hands, the gravity of his actions finally sinking in. The police officers had explained that he would be charged with assault on military personnel on duty, a public order offense, and potentially a hate crime due to the racial nature of his comments. "My job. My reputation," he muttered. The alcohol's false courage completely evaporated now. "You should have thought about that before attacking a royal guard," one of the officers replied without sympathy. Back at the palace officials had already been notified of the incident. James's commanding officer would review the security footage and witness statements. But initial reports suggested that the young soldier had responded exactly according to protocol, using minimum necessary force to neutralize a threat and then returning to his duties. The summer day continued, the sun still beating down on the forecourt of Buckingham Palace. Tourists still took photos, children still pointed excitedly at the guards, and life went on. But for those who had witnessed the brief but dramatic confrontation, their understanding of the royal guards had been forever changed. They weren't just living statues in distinctive uniforms. They were highly trained soldiers who carried themselves with dignity and discipline even in the face of abuse, and who could, when necessary, demonstrate the skills that made them worthy of their prestigious posting. And as for James, he stood at his post, outwardly unchanged by the incident. But inside there was a quiet satisfaction in having done his job well, protecting not just the palace, but the dignity of his position and the reputation of the guards who had served before him and would serve after him. The clock on the palace tower ticked forward. In an hour, the changing of the guard ceremony would take place as scheduled, and tomorrow tourists would still come to marvel at the guards' famous stillness, but perhaps with a new appreciation for the strength and skill that lay beneath the stoic exterior. The next morning, James sat in a small office at the Wellington Barracks, the military base located just a few hundred yards from Buckingham Palace, where the royal guards were housed. Across from him sat Captain Richard Hughes, his commanding officer, and a representative from the palace's public relations team. "You've caused quite a stir, Wilson," Captain Hughes said, though his tone held no criticism. He pushed a tablet across the desk showing a news website. The headline read, "Royal Guard shows perfect restraint against aggressive tourist." James leaned forward to look at the screen. Beneath the headline was a photo of him in his full ceremonial uniform, standing at attention, followed by a series of still images captured from tourist videos showing the incident with Victor. "The footage has gone viral," the PR representative, a woman in her 40s with a kind but professional demeanor, explained. "Over 2 million views already, and it's been picked up by news outlets across the world." James shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He had never sought attention or fame. He had simply been doing his job. "I followed protocol, sir," he said to Captain Hughes. "Minimum necessary force to neutralize the threat." Captain Hughes nodded. "Yes, you did. Textbook response. That's why I'm not worried about any official review. The police have provided their report, and it's clear you acted appropriately." He paused, studying James's face. "But that's not why we're here." The PR representative took over. "The palace has received hundreds of messages of support for you. Letters, emails, social media posts. People are calling you a model of professionalism and restraint." James remained silent, unsure how to respond to this information. "There's also been significant interest from the media," she continued. "They want interviews, background information about you." "I'm not interested in that," James said quickly. "I was just doing my job." Captain Hughes smiled slightly. "I told them you'd say that. And normally we'd shield you from any media attention. The guards aren't supposed to be celebrities. But in this case," he glanced at the PR representative. "In this case," she picked up, "there's an opportunity here to highlight something positive. The dignity and professionalism of the guards, the rigorous training you receive, and frankly to show a diverse face of the British military." James understood what wasn't being explicitly said. As a black soldier in a prestigious position, his handling of racist abuse with such professionalism could send a powerful message. "What exactly would this involve?" he asked cautiously. "Nothing that would interfere with your duties," Captain Hughes assured him. "A brief statement that we'd prepare with you. Perhaps one carefully selected interview with a respected journalist. Nothing more." James thought about it. He had never sought the spotlight, but if his experience could help change perceptions or inspire others, perhaps it was worth the discomfort. "I'll consider it, sir," he said finally, "but my priority remains my duties." "Of course," both Captain Hughes and the PR representative said almost in unison. As James left the meeting, his phone buzzed with messages from family and friends who had seen the news. His mother had sent a simple text, "So proud of you. Your grandfather would have been too." The thought warmed him as he headed back to the barracks to prepare for his next shift. Meanwhile, across London at the Charing Cross police station, Victor Kensington was being led into an interview room. The night in the holding cell had not been kind to him. His designer clothes were rumpled, his face was pale and drawn, and his hands shook slightly as he sat down opposite two detectives. "Mr. Kensington," the older detective began, "I'm Detective Inspector Taylor, and this is Detective Constable Williams. We're here to discuss the charges against you following yesterday's incident at Buckingham Palace." Victor ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Look, I know I messed up. I had too much to drink. Can't we just—" "This is significantly more serious than a drunken mistake, Mr. Kensington," Detective Taylor interrupted. "You're facing charges of assault on military personnel on duty, which carries a potential prison sentence of up to 6 months. Additionally, there's a public order offense and a potential hate crime charge due to the racial nature of your comments, which were captured on multiple recordings." The color drained from Victor's face. "Prison? But I have a job, a life. I can't go to prison." "You should have considered that before attacking a royal guard," Detective Williams said without sympathy. "We've reviewed footage from multiple sources. Your actions were clearly deliberate and preceded by racially aggravated verbal abuse." Victor slumped in his chair. "My lawyer? When can I speak to my lawyer?" "He's been notified and is on his way," Detective Taylor replied. "In the meantime, we need to take your formal statement about the events." As Victor began to recount his version of events, trying to minimize his actions, Detective Williams couldn't help but think about the stark contrast between this man's behavior and that of the guard he had attacked. One had shown discipline, professionalism, and restraint even when provoked. The other had let alcohol and prejudice lead him to actions that might forever alter the course of his life. Back at Buckingham Palace, the afternoon shift was underway. James had returned to his post, standing at attention as tourists filed past. If anything, the crowds were larger than usual, word having spread about the previous day's events. Many visitors glanced at him with undisguised curiosity, wondering if he was the same guard from the viral videos. A small girl approached the barrier rope, looking up at James with wide eyes. Her father stood a respectful distance behind her. "Excuse me, Mr. Guard," she said in a small voice. "Was it you who stopped the bad man yesterday? My daddy showed me the video." James maintained his forward gaze, not responding as per protocol during his duty. The father stepped forward, gently placing his hands on his daughter's shoulders. "Remember what I told you, Lucy. The guards can't talk or move while they're on duty. It's part of their job." He looked up at James. "I apologize for the interruption. We just wanted to say thank you for your service. What you did yesterday taught my daughter an important lesson about dignity and doing the right thing." He guided his daughter away, but not before she placed a small folded piece of paper on the ground near the barrier. James couldn't see what was on it from his position, but one of the regular palace staff noticed and picked it up. The woman smiled as she unfolded it, revealing a child's drawing of a guard in a red uniform and tall black hat, standing tall while a crowd of smiling people looked on. Beneath it, in wobbly letters, were the words, "Thank you, brave guard." The staff member carefully refolded the drawing and placed it in her pocket, making a mental note to pass it along to the barracks later. It would join dozens of other messages of support that had been arriving since the incident. Throughout the afternoon, James noticed many visitors giving him thumbs-up signs or small nods of appreciation as they passed. Though he maintained his stoic expression, inwardly he felt a sense of pride, not for the attention, but for having represented his regiment and his role with honor. As his shift neared its end, James noticed a familiar face in the crowd, Thomas, his fellow guard who had been on duty with him during the incident. Thomas was in civilian clothes, having completed his own shift earlier. He caught James's eye briefly and gave an almost imperceptible nod of respect before continuing on his way. Between soldiers, sometimes the smallest gestures carried the greatest meaning. When James finally completed his shift and returned to the barracks, he found several of his fellow guards gathered in the common area, watching news coverage of the incident on a television. "There he is," one of them called out as James entered. "The famous one." There was good-natured laughter and a round of applause, which James waved off with a smile. These were his brothers in arms, and their respect meant more to him than any viral video or news story. "Seriously, though," said Paul, A veteran guard with over 10 years of service, you handled that perfectly. Some of the newer recruits could learn from watching how you controlled that situation. Just did what any of you would have done, James replied, taking a seat among them. Maybe, Paul acknowledged, but you did it with cameras rolling and the whole world watching. That takes extra nerve. As the evening progressed, the conversation shifted away from the incident to other topics. Upcoming duty rotations, weekend plans, family news. James was grateful for the normalcy. Despite the unexpected attention, he didn't want the incident to define him or change how his colleagues saw him. Later, alone in his room, James called his mother. She had been worried since seeing the news, and he wanted to reassure her that he was fine. "They're not giving you a hard time, are they?" she asked. "The military or the palace?" "No, Mom," he assured her. "Actually, they've been very supportive. Captain Hughes even said they're proud of how I handled it." "As they should be," his mother said firmly. "Your father and I are proud too, though I nearly had a heart attack when I saw that man push you." James laughed softly. "I was trained for much worse, Mom. That was nothing." They talked for a while longer about family matters, his mother deliberately changing the subject to his sister's upcoming graduation and his cousin's new baby. Normal, everyday things that had nothing to do with viral videos or racial incidents. By the time they said goodbye, James felt grounded again, reminded of who he was beyond the uniform and the unexpected spotlight. As he prepared for bed, his phone buzzed with a message from Captain Hughes. "Meeting tomorrow. Shore 900. Decision needed on statement to press." James sighed. The attention wasn't over yet, but he would face it as he faced everything, with discipline, dignity, and a commitment to doing what was right. Not for recognition or fame, but because that was who he was, both in uniform and out of it. As he drifted off to sleep, his final thought was not of Victor or the incident or the viral fame, but of his grandfather who had first inspired his military service. "Did I make you proud today?" He wondered silently, and somewhere in his heart, he felt he knew the answer. 3 weeks had passed since the incident at Buckingham Palace. The media frenzy had gradually died down, though the video continued to circulate online. For James, life had mostly returned to normal. Daily duties, training, and the occasional good-natured teasing from his fellow guards about his celebrity status. Today, however, was different. James adjusted his tie as he looked. In the mirror of the small preparation room at Westminster Magistrates' Court, he was in his Class A uniform, the formal military attire worn for official functions, rather than the distinctive red tunic and bearskin hat of his guard duties. Captain Hughes stood nearby, checking his watch. "Ready?" the captain asked. James nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yes, sir." Today was Victor Kensington's court hearing. After discussions with his lawyer, Victor had decided to plead guilty to all charges, hoping for leniency in sentencing. James had been asked to attend and had agreed, though he wasn't sure how he felt about facing the man again. As they walked through the corridors of the court building, James noticed people watching him, some with recognition in their eyes. The story had been covered extensively in the press, with most reports painting him as a model of restraint and professionalism in the face of abuse. The courtroom was smaller than James had imagined from television shows. He and Captain Hughes took seats in the public gallery as directed by a court official. There were several journalists present, along with what appeared to be legal students and a few curious members of the public. When Victor was led in, James was struck by how different he looked from the aggressive, intoxicated man who had confronted him at the palace. Today, Victor was wearing a conservative suit, his hair neatly combed, his posture submissive. He glanced around the courtroom nervously, his eyes briefly meeting James's before quickly looking away. The proceedings began with the formal reading of the charges: assault on military personnel on duty, racially aggravated public disorder, and trespassing on a protected site. Victor stood to enter his plea. "Guilty, Your Honor," he said in a voice barely above a whisper. The prosecutor then presented the facts of the case, including showing some of the video footage that had been captured by tourists. James found it strange watching himself on the screen, seeing the incident from an outside perspective. The court fell silent as they watched Victor's aggressive approach, his shove, and James's controlled, professional response. When it came time for mitigation, Victor's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, My client deeply regrets his actions on the day in question. He was under significant personal stress and had consumed alcohol, which affected his judgment. However, he wishes to make it clear that this is not an excuse, merely context. He fully accepts responsibility for his behavior. The lawyer continued, Mr. Kensington has no previous criminal record. He has already faced significant consequences, including the loss of his job as a result of this incident. He has also voluntarily enrolled in an alcohol awareness program and a diversity training course. He wishes to apologize personally to the guard involved and to the royal household for his disrespect. James listened impassively. The apology felt hollow, something Victor's lawyer had clearly advised to help reduce his sentence rather than a genuine expression of remorse. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and a penetrating gaze, addressed Victor directly. Mr. Kensington, do you have anything you wish to say before I pass sentence? Victor stood slowly. Yes, Your Honor. He turned slightly, looking toward where James sat. I want to apologize to the soldier I assaulted. My behavior was inexcusable. The things I said, he paused, swallowing hard. They don't reflect who I want to be. I've had a lot of time to think over the past few weeks, and I'm deeply ashamed. I also want to apologize to the royal household and to everyone who witnessed my disgraceful behavior. I know words aren't enough, but I am truly sorry. There was something in his voice that sounded more genuine than James had expected. Perhaps the reality of facing serious consequences had prompted actual reflection. The judge considered for a moment before speaking. Mr. Kensington, you assaulted a member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces while he was performing his duties. You used racially abusive language and you trespassed in a protected area. These are serious offenses that ordinarily would warrant a custodial sentence. Victor's shoulders slumped slightly. However, the judge continued, I take into account your previously clean record, your guilty plea, and what appears to be genuine remorse. I also note that the soldier in question responded with exemplary restraint and professionalism, preventing what could have been a more serious incident. She paused, reviewing the papers before her. Taking all factors into consideration, I sentence you to 6 months imprisonment, suspended for 2 years. There was a murmur in the courtroom. A suspended sentence meant Victor wouldn't go to prison unless he committed another offense during the 2-year period. Additionally, the judge went on, you will complete 250 hours of community service, pay a fine of $2,000, and continue with both the alcohol awareness and diversity training programs. You will also be subject to an exclusion order preventing you from entering the vicinity of Buckingham Palace for a period of 1 year. She fixed Victor with a stern look. Consider yourself fortunate, Mr. Kensington. This is your opportunity to demonstrate that your remorse is genuine and that you have learned from this experience. With that, the hearing was concluded. Victor was led away to complete the necessary paperwork for his sentence, while journalists hurried out to file their stories. As James and Captain Hughes prepared to leave, a court official approached them. Excuse me, gentlemen. Mr. Kensington has asked if he might speak with you briefly before you go. You're under no obligation to agree, of course. James looked at Captain Hughes, who said, It's entirely your decision. After a moment's consideration, James nodded. All right. They were shown to a small meeting room. A few minutes later, Victor entered, accompanied by a court officer who remained by the door. Up close, James could see the toll the past weeks had taken on the man. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he had lost weight. Thank you for agreeing to see me, Victor said awkwardly. I wanted to apologize face to face, not just through the court. James nodded but remained silent, waiting. What I said, Victor struggled to find the words. There's no excuse. I was raised better than that. He took a deep breath. The truth is, I was having the worst day of my life. I'd just been passed over for a promotion I thought was certain. My wife had told me she wanted a divorce, and I decided to drown my sorrows. But that doesn't justify what I did to you. No, James agreed quietly. It doesn't. I know, Victor said quickly. I know, and I'll have to live with that. With the videos online, with everyone knowing what I did. He hesitated. I lost everything because of my actions that day. My job, my reputation, possibly my marriage. But that's on me, not you. You were just doing your duty. James studied the man before him. There was a part of him that wanted to remain angry, to reject the apology. But what would that accomplish? We all make mistakes, he said finally. What matters is what we learn from them. Victor looked relieved at the response. Thank you. And for what it's worth, the way you handled yourself that day, it was impressive. You could have hurt me badly and no one would have blamed you, but you didn't. That's not what we're trained to do, James replied simply. With a nod to Captain Hughes, James indicated he was ready to leave. They had said all that needed to be said. Outside the courthouse, a small group of reporters were waiting. Private Wilson, how do you feel about the sentence? Was it fair? One called out. James paused, considering his response. The Palace PR team had prepared a statement, but in this moment he decided to speak from the heart. Justice isn't about punishment, he said. It's about accountability and learning. If Mr. Kensington has learned from this, then yes, I think the sentence is fair. Another reporter pushed forward. Has this incident changed how you feel about your role as a Royal Guard? James shook his head. Not at all. I'm proud to serve. One person's actions don't define my experience or my commitment to my duties. Captain Hughes stepped in then, thanking the press and guiding James toward their waiting car. As they drove back to the barracks, James gazed out at the London streets, thinking about everything that had happened. The incident itself had lasted less than 5 minutes, but its ripples had spread far and wide. It had become a talking point about race, about the role of the guards, about behavior and consequences. You handled that well, Captain Hughes said, breaking the silence. Both in court and with the press. Thank you, sir. The Colonel wanted me to tell you that your rotation at the palace is coming to an end next month as scheduled. After that, you're being considered for promotion to Lance Corporal and a training role. Your handling of this situation hasn't gone unnoticed. James felt a surge of pride. A promotion was something he had been working toward, and a training role would allow him to help shape the next generation of soldiers. That evening, James called his family to tell them about the court case and the potential promotion. His mother was thrilled, of course, already planning a celebration for when it became official. Your grandfather would be so proud, she said, as she often did. But this time, James truly felt the weight of those words. Later, as he prepared for bed, James thought about Victor Kensington. The man had made terrible choices and had faced the consequences. But he had also been given a chance to learn and change. There was something fitting about that. In a few days, James would be back on duty at Buckingham Palace, standing at attention as tourists filed past, many still recognizing him from the viral video. But they would see more than just the man from the video now. They would see what a royal guard truly was, not just a ceremonial figure in a distinctive uniform, but a trained soldier who carried himself with dignity and discipline, who represented the best of what service meant. And for James, that was enough. Not fame or recognition, but the knowledge that he had done his duty with honor, both in that heated moment of confrontation and in the quieter moments that followed. That was what would stay with him long after the video stopped circulating and the public moved on to the next viral sensation. That was what really mattered.